Good morning, patrons. We have 3 questions for July's question and answer. So let's dive in with that, starting up with Troy, who wants to know if I had to gender swap any one of my characters, who would it be and why? You know what, Troy? That was actually a much more difficult question than I think maybe I thought it was. Like when I first read it, when I actually had to sit down and think of an answer. You know, because the gender of these characters is a decision that's already been made, and so when I think of these characters, they're just the characters, and that's who they are. And so suddenly having to think of them as the opposite gender, it was just very bizarre to me. It's like I'm like struggling to picture, what that might do, not only for for their personalities, if it changed them at all, but also the dynamics, the relationships that they might have with the other characters, and how that might change. So I actually had to give this one a lot of thought. When I read the question, I was like, oh, that'll be easy, I'll just I'll pick something. But when I sat down to do this video, I actually had to sit for a while and really consider which of the many characters I've used over the years, which one I would I could foresee gender swapping. And the answer that I came up with was Lucas, actually. Of all of them, picturing, switching to the opposite sex, Lucas was the one that jumped out to me as like, yeah, that would be something I'd be, that would be interesting. That would be interesting to explore. And again, like I know Lucas as Lucas, and that's just, I've had that character for like 16 years now, so it's still weird to think. But if I were to gender swap a character, I could foresee using Sarah Silverman, actually, as a template for a gender-swapped Lucas. I feel like using her as the inspiration, I think a lot of their personality traits would mesh very well, and actually, make that a rather interesting character to write from a gender-swapped point of view. David wants to know, do you ever have fans randomly accost you in public? Is it really weird, or do you enjoy it? So, for the first part of that question, do I ever have fans randomly accost me in public? Yes and no, I guess. Yes, in that it has happened. No, in that it is not by any stretch a common occurrence. It has happened some years back. I was in a Best Buy, and someone approached me, recognized me from somehow recognized me. See, here's the thing, is I don't really have a job that lends itself to visual recognition. I mean, the few of you that watch these videos, the few people that watch the streams when I do them, you guys would have an idea of what I look like, but for the most part, the vast majority of the people that read my comic strip probably don't really know what I look like. So it's almost like like a radio personality in that respect, in that, like if I'm out and about, I might walk right by somebody that reads my comic, but they're not gonna, recognize me instantly like they might if I were like a YouTube star or something like that. But at any rate, it has happened on rare occasions. It's happened, like I said, I was at a store. It's happened a couple other times. It does happen, and I don't know if this really counts. If I go somewhere for a convention, to a city or something like that, if I go to a convention and I do the convention, but then like I go out to a restaurant at night, or I go to a store or something, it's happened more often there. But that's almost like, because like there's a higher concentration of the type of people that would read my comic, and B, they know that I'm like in that area. So I don't know if that really counts so much as the few times it's happened like really like randomly and out in public. And then do I enjoy it? I don't. Like, it's weird. It's a weird feeling. I think like if that kind of thing happens to you a lot, I feel like you would get used to it. Like if Robert Downey Jr. is walking, like, I mean, he must know that if he goes out of the house, like that's gonna happen, and so you kind of like, he could kind of prepare for it. Like it's a mindset that he's in. I'm never prepared for that. Like if I'm out and I'm just out and out, and that happens, it's very bizarre, and it's surreal. I mean, I don't like tend to dislike meeting fans of what I do, but at the same time, it's just, so there's just this really weird, like, awkward, like, oh, you know, that's you know who I am, and I wasn't expecting it, and you know, so it's just a very bizarre, you know, it's a very bizarre feeling. You have to remember that I spend like 99% of my time in this office doing what I do, okay? And so, like, when I go to a convention, which I don't even do these days, but when I go to a convention, you know, and people are, like, come up and they want my signature and a picture with me or something like that, that's not the norm. This is my norm. That is out of the norm. That's a you know, so I never quite really get used to that. It's a very, you know, surreal sort of experience. Even today, 16 years I've been doing this, it's still never quite, like, become, like, you know, just status quo. And so last up this month, Steven wanted to know, what are the character notes like for players 1, 2, 3, and 4? You know, what are their niches? So basically he's asking, you know, like how do I view these characters when I go to write them? You know, what do I imagine their personalities to be and how they differ? So right off the bat, player 1 and player 2 they're very similar. But there are some subtle differences in their personalities. I consider player 1 sort of my baseline, you know, sort of what I imagine like an average gamer. You know, he's got a bit of a mean streak to him, but also, you know, and he's not dumb, but he's not, like, you know, particularly intelligent. I view player 2 as slightly more clever, slightly more logical and intelligent. So basically, if I write a strip and, you know, one half of the dialogue starts to, you know, veers towards being slightly more reasonable or slightly more erudite, you know, that's where player 2 goes, and then player 1 is, you know, like I said, sort of my baseline, sort of my jack of all trades. Player 3 tends to be a little bit on the meeker side, unless, you know, I mean, he has a temper, but he's typically on the meeker side. He, you know, obviously he really loves tabletop games. That's his forte. Like, he plays video games, but tabletop games are like his real passion. He's the one who gets the rest of the group to play board games, RPGs, that kind of stuff at the tabletop. And like I said, he is the least prone to violence out of all the players. And player 4, the best way I can describe player 4 is basically Ethan distilled down to, like, the purest essence of what I think Ethan was. Like, no impulse control, you know, has an imaginary friend, little to no empathy, you know, just basically, like, completely unhinged and disconnected from reality. But not quite so far as a Chef Brian would be, where, like, things just, like, stop making sense completely. But player 4 is definitely the one that, you know, that looks at a situation that players 1, 2, and 3 would interpret in one way, and they might react to it on at different, you know, with varying degrees of severity. But player 4 looks at that same situation, and she sees it from just, like, a completely different angle, an angle that, like, may not even make sense. That's what player 4 is to me. And that is all of our questions for July. Thank you for being a patron. Thank you for asking questions for this video, and we'll see you next month.